And you also mentioned the slow time anyone has with Freedom of Information Acts. If you try to get a Freedom of Information Act request, requesting documents, it seems to take forever, and it's got to be approved, and then it's all redacted. And this is the problem. The real problem is the governments are doing stuff they shouldn't be doing, and that people would be so offended if they found out, they would, possibly take to the streets like in other countries we're seeing. So here, it has to be secret, and this is the crux of WikiLeaks, when you start embarrassing these governments, and the embarrassment is just showing them what they're doing. It's not name-calling or anything, it's just showing the light of day the subversive actions of people in power.
Yeah, and then when you look at what happens when you show the light of day, okay? This young man, Manning, who released all the stuff to WikiLeaks, this young soldier, they're holding him in solitary confinement right now. I don't even know if he has a lawyer. Nobody does. And it's interesting because the first thing that he released was this film footage of this helicopter murdering innocent people in Baghdad, shooting them down with machine guns on a street corner, right? Well, I find it interesting that this young man is now in prison who released that, and the murderers are still free.
Exactly.
I mean, to me, there's the classic case of killing the messenger. How could these guys that cold-bloodedly murdered these people be free, and the person that exposed him is now in jail?
And that reminds me of 9/11 with the report and all that no one's held accountable. No one had a slap on the wrist. Nobody demoted sideways even. It's just,
no. Even if you believe totally what happened on 9/11 and what they told us, you're exactly right. Nobody was held accountable. Nobody was held responsible. Nobody was fired. I come from the Navy SEALs where failure is not an option. If you fail, you're gone. And yet, here was a classic failure. People were not fired. In fact, they were promoted. I mean, look at Condoleezza Rice. She's the one that got the memo from, what's his name, in the NSA, the August 6th memo that said bin Laden's going to use planes and crash them into buildings. And she sits there in front of the world and says, I had no idea he would do this. Well, it says right in the memo. And then what happened? Was she demoted? No. She was promoted to Secretary of State when Powell left. Imagine that, failing your way to the top.
So you can only conclude that it was a glowing success and it was not a failure, and we just don't understand it, that it's a false flag operation.
To me, I'll put it to you this way. When I was governor, not that anything of that magnitude could ever happen that would affect the governor, but if there was something disaster that happened as governor, and if it happened because of malfeasance or lack of whatever, or people just not paying attention, I can assure you heads would have rolled. I would have fired people. And yet, 9/11, there wasn't one person that got fired that day. Nobody. And the reason why, it's simple. If you start firing people, then people start talking, and people start saying what they know. The easiest way to get away with something, don't fire anybody, just move on and go on to the next thing. Everybody goes to work again the next day, and everything's fine.
And like in your book you mentioned about WikiLeaks, I'm not sure who the quote comes from, it's from you or not, but WikiLeaks has become a war ground, people versus the government. I mean, we have to fight against our own government just to get documents out, and if you get some out, like Bradley Manning, you were arrested, and you'd think there'd be a way easier treatment of whistleblowers, but not at all.
Well, that's been the interesting thing we found out about the Obama administration, is even harsher on whistleblowers than the Bush one was. They're being as harsh as you can possibly be. Why?
Well, I guess the promise of hope is not exactly is an optimistic outlook as it was sold to be.
Well, again, we got to be diligent as citizens, and again, I don't release this book feeling good about it because, as I said, I served my country, and I like to think of my country in a positive way, but after reading and researching these documents, I'll tell you, I got a hollow feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it does not make me feel good. And the releasing of this book doesn't necessarily make me feel good, but I feel it has to be done because we've got to take our country back. And I'll tell people the simplest way to do it: stop voting for Democrats and Republicans. Vote for anybody else, because until we break their stranglehold, both of them are completely controlled by the corporations. That's why we're fascists today. The simple definition of fascism is when corporate teams up with religion and controls the government. Well, both the Democratic and Republican parties are totally controlled by corporations. Totally. And so until we break that, we will never have our country back again.
Also in the book, you itemize this turning a blind eye to the Gulf War syndrome, to the problems of the troops that have gone on to fight these, I don't know what you call them, excursions, because they're not even called wars anymore. They're just exercises. We don't have to go to Congress to vote on anything. It's not a war.
Exactly. Well, the thing that disturbs me, and you can throw the Patriot Act into this, how on earth can a president and a Congress pass a law that's more powerful than the Constitution or the Bill of Rights? And yet they're doing it, and we're letting them get away with it. Because Homeland Security bill is ridiculous, what that does, to the Bill of Rights. It basically, it just shreds it in multiple places. I'm heading into the book here to see if I can find that spot with that I wrote it down and that we recorded it. But what it's doing is awful. And how do we allow them to do that? The forefathers of our country created our country with the Constitution and Bill of Rights so that it was a major deal to change them. You have to amend the Constitution, which can take 4 to 5 years or 10 years to do that. And yet, the way it is now, a president and a Congress can just pass a new law, and that law takes priority over the Bill of Rights.
Well, it's shocking the speed that it's happening at. I mentioned the Gulf War illness and syndrome. Do you want to just speak a little bit about the documents that you have uncovered?
Well, again, it's the classic case of all of these soldiers. We pay homage to them. We tell them how we love them. We tell them how they fight for our freedom. And yet, when they're done doing it, and there's bad things that happen, like Gulf War syndrome, where they're coming down with these exotic diseases and all this crap that went on over there, and we turn our backs on them then. Well, that's normal. It's been going on for years. That when guys fight in the wars, once the war is over, we seem to forget about them. And we don't realize that wars have many, many stages of collateral damage that go long after the war is over. You know what disturbed me the most about the 2010 elections? The wars weren't even part of the dialogue. Do you recall that?
Yeah, actually,
we're fighting 2 wars, and in the 2010 elections, nobody even talked about them. Not the media, not the candidates, nobody. And now, lo and behold, we're in a 3rd war. Think of it this way, if I can give this to you in this light. A child born in 2001, right, has lived all 10 of their years, and now will believe that the United States is constantly at war because we've been at war their whole life. And I'll take it back to me. I turned 60 this summer. Over 30 years of my life, the United States has been at war. Over half. And we've accomplished nothing. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, all these other little wars, Grenada, Iraq, all of them. It's over half my lifetime this country's been at war, and we've accomplished nothing with these wars. And you notice that the Chinese aren't at war, do you?
Yeah.
They're busy building their economy instead of running around the world killing people.
I know you're a fan of Fletcher Prouty's writing, and he wrote about that there would be these little outbreaks everywhere to keep people preoccupied and occupied
Well,
with...
Fletcher said it was all planned. As he says in his famous quote, nothing just happens, everything is planned. And I'll tell you, I'm beginning to believe that more and more every day, is that nothing just happens, everything is planned.
Now, one of the most disturbing, I think, segments of your book for me was the actual documents you had itemizing Afghanistan and the drugs and large sums of money, cash, millions, I mean, coming and going, but mostly out of Afghanistan to Dubai. And I think that the cables indicate that they are paying off drug lords, and we have a war on drugs, and here the whole thing is just going full bore.
Well, it could be even bigger than that, because look at it this way. We just went through a major problem on Wall Street, correct? 2008?
Yeah.
Well, with the banks. Well, remember, those international banks are also the banks who take the dirty drug money and launder it. Well, when the Taliban came into Afghanistan, 90% of the world's heroin or the poppy comes from Afghanistan. The Taliban went in and shut them all down. Do you think that played a role in the economic drop worldwide? That all of a sudden the banks weren't getting the bankrolled millions and billions of dollars of drug money? And it was cut off? And that could have played a role in what went down? Something to think about. Well, now that we're in Afghanistan, the drugs are back up to full level again, and heroin is alive and well in the world.
Yeah, it seems to be the number one opium and heroin, and the number one place to grow it, Afghanistan.
Oh, it is. It produces almost 90% of the opium poppy is from Afghanistan. And the Taliban had actually shut the drug lords down. The drug lords are our allies over there. We've got them back up and running again. But yet here in America, we won't even legalize marijuana.
Yeah, exactly. And like I mentioned, the sums of money that were mentioned that were going in and out per weekend, per month, were staggering. That you wonder, why does this war cost so much? Because we're paying off everybody.
Yep, absolutely. We try to buy our wars now, too. We're using capitalism on that also. You don't necessarily have to kill your opponent. You can buy them off. Which, maybe that's better. Then at least you don't get people dying over it. But, who knows?
Now, in the book, another thing you brought up were documents on the civilian inmate labor. And you had, I think, one of your episodes on these camps on your Conspiracy Theory TV show. Do you want to just discuss this a little bit?
That's the show where we hit the nerve, because there was a huge response from Washington to Time AOL, and they pulled it after it aired once, and now they won't even acknowledge we made it. You can't bring it up on the internet, and it's not even listed as one of my shows anymore. It's blank. So obviously we struck a nerve, and one of the big things was there was a Homeland Security bill that at the end of the bill, it authorized FEMA to build at least a minimum of 6 internment camps. Well, for what? Well, I was told in case there's a disaster like Katrina, we have a place to move masses of people and take care of them. Well, that sounds good on the surface, but the problem is in this bill, it specifies that FEMA can use them for anything it desires to use them for. Now, who's going into these 6 internment camps they're going to build? What qualifies you? A dissident like me? Someone that speaks out and calls the government? Will they ship me off to some camp to silence me? I'm not sure. The last time we had internment camps was when the Japanese Americans were put in them at the start of World War II. And we all know how horrible that was, because we ended up having to pay them restitution and money for what we did to them.
And
so